The morning the painter knocked, Lena's house smelled like lemons and endings. She had been awake since 4, reorganizing spice jars and folding dish towels into tight, nervous origami, the rituals of a woman trying to keep her life from spilling off the edges. When the doorbell rang, it pinged through the quiet like a pin dropped in cathedral silence, and Lena thought, not for the first time, this is the moment, whether I know it or not. She opened the door, expecting the crew Mark had arranged. 2 men with ladders and radio chatter, some proof that her husband still remembered this house needed tending, even if their marriage had gone yellow at the edges like old newspaper. Instead, a single man stood on the porch, hands in his paint-streaked jacket pockets, a portfolio tube balanced against his shoulder. He was too young to look so tired and too careful to pretend he wasn't. "Elijah," he said when she didn't ask, his voice warmed by a hint of a coastal drawl he must have carried inland like a secret. "Mark asked me to survey the exterior. Sorry I'm early." Lena stepped aside. Morning light broke over his shoulder and strolled into the house like it owned the place. She noticed everything at once. How he didn't tap his boots on the mat, how his eyes lifted to the crown molding as if he was tasting it, how he glanced at her hands, and then away, politely, like her fingers were a private confession. He was the opposite of Mark's world. Not spreadsheets, not urgent emails, not the sterile clarity of profit and loss. He looked at things as if they could be redeemed. "Coffee?" she asked, already pouring. He smiled at the steam, the kind men do when something ordinary is treated like a gift. "If it's no trouble." "It's trouble," she said, the joke landing softer than she meant, "but I like trouble that smells like coffee." They did not flirt. To call it that would be to cheapen what began as attention, a quality Lena had been starved of for years. Attention is the first kindness and the last cruelty. Once someone learns the exact shape of silence in another, the story has already begun. He walked the perimeter with a penlight and a soft bristled brush, testing edges, tapping wood. "The porch posts are hollow with rot near the base," he said finally, "and whoever caulked the window trim last time used a paintable acrylic that cracked under sun. It needs a siliconized elastomeric." He spoke like a craftsman who said the names of materials like prayers. Lena nodded, though she didn't fully understand. She understood the devotion. "Mark travels a lot," she offered, the words slipping out, an apology she shouldn't have to make. Elijah glanced at her and then at his clipboard. "Some things take longer when you're alone," he said, circling a line item. When he stepped onto the back deck, the wind rose and took Lena's breath with it. The yard was a green bowl, a place where summer used to shout with barbecues and long nights on lawn chairs, where she and Mark had once picked out constellations and named them after futures they were certain belonged to them. Now the yard was quiet and full of indistinct birds. Elijah paused by the railing, pressing his palm to the weathered top rail, and Lena watched his fingers, how easily they rested, how sure. "Do you ever repaint without changing the color?" she asked. He considered. "Sometimes you repaint because the structure asks for it, not the eye," he said. "Sometimes the eye catches up later." The sentence hooked something inside her and tugged. Later, she would hear it echo when she was alone, when the night pressed close and Mark's side of the bed was cool. By noon, Elijah had finished the assessment and stacked his tools with a neat care that felt like a benediction. He washed his hands at the kitchen sink, sleeves pushed to his forearms, and Lena tried not to stare at the vein that rose, blue and purposeful like a river with a destination. He thanked her for the coffee as if he were the one who'd received something rare. "When do you start?" she asked. "I can begin tomorrow," he said. "Mornings early before the heat, paint listens better when the world is quiet." "Do you always talk like that?" she asked, grinning before she could stop herself. "Only when I want the job," he said, smiling back. When Mark called that evening, he sounded like a man who was crossing a street while reading a report. "The painter came by?" he asked in the clipped way he had, as if everything could be collapsed into bullet points, summary action items. Lena told him yes, told him about rot and elastomeric caulk, careful to keep Elijah's name in a neutral part of her mouth. Mark signaled approval with a distracted "good." Put it on the card, and then slid into the real reason for the call. A client dinner, a late flight, a board packet that had to be prepped, the economy doing whatever economies do when they need to be wrestled into compliance. "Okay," she said, a word that had become a harbor and a surrender. "Be safe." After the call, the house felt too large, her movements leaving no echo. She stood in the doorway of the guest room they never used and stared at the unmade bed as if it could answer a question she was too afraid to ask. Outside, wind found the eaves and sang. At dawn, Elijah returned with a ladder and tarps and a radio he never turned on. The porch became a patient under careful hands, and Lena found herself hovering with water, with questions, with an attention that had nowhere else to go. He worked without performance, the quiet kind of skill that makes the world more itself. At lunch, she brought him a sandwich and a bowl of cherries. He ate slowly, pitting each cherry with his thumb, arranging the stones in a small pile like coins he was saving for later. I used to live near the harbor, he said, unprompted. My mother could name a boat by the sound of its engine, said every machine has a signature if you listen long enough. Did you listen? She asked. For a while, he said, until they all started to sound like leaving. The afternoon was warm, paint glinting in the can like a small sun. When he finished for the day, Elijah stood back and squinted. It's not finished, he said, but it's already telling a different story. So am I, Lena almost said, but didn't. That night, when Mark texted a photo from his dinner, a table crowded with men in ties doing the pantomime of camaraderie, Lena typed and deleted 3 different replies before settling on a thumbs up she hated herself for. She placed her phone face down and went outside, sitting on the porch steps where the paint smelled like possibility. Somewhere inside the house, a clock ticked, and for the first time in months, she heard it. She didn't sleep much, but when she did, she dreamed of a ship making a slow turn in a narrow channel, hull scraping the dock, not enough damage to sink it, just enough to leave a mark you'd notice in certain light. In the morning, she woke with the taste of salt on her tongue and the knowledge that a story had begun without her permission, and that she had answered it by opening a door. The second week brought small weather and smaller revelations. The forecast said intermittent rain, which in their town meant the sky would make and unmake promises across a single afternoon, and Elijah adjusted accordingly. He worked under the porch roof when the clouds bruised up, and he took his coffee black when the breeze threatened to steal the steam. Lena learned the pace of his days, how he stretched his back before climbing, how he touched the ladder with the tenderness of a man greeting an old friend, how he ran a fingertip along each seam after caulking, as if sealing an oath. She also learned the pace of her loneliness. It had been a long, slow drip, then a leak, then a flood she'd labeled drought to make it bearable. Mark had not so much left as faded. He was a ghost that still cast a shadow, and Lena traced it, trying to remember the man who had once fallen asleep mid-sentence on their wedding night because joy had exhausted him. Now he used words like scalability and runway and optics, and Lena used words like okay and I'll handle it and no worries even when worry was all she had. Elijah noticed a small crack in the front step and frowned. Freeze-thaw cycle, he said. Water finds the smallest weakness and does museum work, slow, precise, irreversible. He lifted his eyes to Lena as if to apologize for the metaphor. It's apt, she said. He set to work mixing patch compound, the air filling with the mineral honesty of it. My father used to say a house is a story that runs out of ink unless someone keeps writing, he said. What did he do? She asked. Left, he said simply, then softened it with a shrug. Before that, he was a cabinet maker who loved the spaces between wood as much as the wood. Lena stacked plates in the dishwasher that afternoon as if arguing a case to a quiet judge. In the silences between cycles, she heard her own breath and wondered when she had started hiding it. She sent Mark a text about the step repair and the extra cost. He replied with a single word, approved, and a thumbs-up emoticon that felt like a sticker on a folder she hadn't wanted to carry. When the rain finally committed, it came down in a clean sheet, rinsing dust from the leaves and blessing the gutters with brief purpose. Elijah worked until the drop pattern grew too insistent, then packed his tools and lingered at the threshold. I can come inside and prep the window casings if you don't mind the mess, he offered, wet hair combed back by weather. She stepped aside. The house absorbed him as it had the day he first crossed the threshold, but this time the rooms felt complicit, like they, too, had been waiting for a hand that knew where to knock. He laid down drop cloths with a carefulness that made the floorboards sigh, taped along edges with a surgeon's steadiness, and began the work of making old surfaces confess. They talked in fragments that found their way into coherence. She told him about the class she'd almost taken at the community college, landscape painting on Saturdays, and how she hadn't signed up because Saturday had become Mark's only day home, and she'd wanted to be available for whatever version of him the week returned to her. Elijah nodded as if he'd seen that particular abandonment before. You can still take it, he said mildly. The course ended last spring, she said. He looked at the window frame and then at her. Then paint anyway, he said, as if the world were that simple and the simplicity was the point. When the power flickered, for a second she saw the future. Candles, a storm's slow thrum, Mark's call not coming, Elijah's voice low and careful in the dark. The light steadied, and the moment passed, leaving only the afterglow of a possibility Lena was both drawn to and terrified of. That evening, Mark arrived early, and the house startled like a deer. He stood in the entry, suitcase in one hand, brow furrowing at the sheets of tape and the smell of primer. "Did we budget for all this interior work?" he asked, voice cordial enough to bruise. "It's preventative," Lena said lightly. "Cheaper than replacing casings later." Elijah appeared from the den, wiping his hands on a rag. "I'm charging the same hourly," he offered, not defensive, just factual. Mark's eyes cut to him, assessing, cataloging. "Right," he said. "Thanks for the transparency." He shifted his suitcase like a shield and turned to Lena. "We need to be mindful of discretionary spend this quarter." Something in her flinched, old training, but she held the line. "We are," she said. "I am." Elijah gathered his tools and left with a nod, the door closing softly behind him. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of things not said, a room crowded with unspoken furniture. At dinner, Mark made conversation like someone reading a weather report from a faraway city. He praised the salmon, mentioned the board's strategic pivot, asked about the neighbor's new fence. Lena nodded and placed her hands around her glass to keep them from shaking. When she raised Elijah's suggestion about switching to elastomeric caulk outside, Mark blinked as if she'd used an unfamiliar term. "That's fine," he said, impatience riding the edge of his tone. "I trust him. Do you trust me?" She didn't ask. Later, in bed, Mark lay on his back, phone screen lighting his face in increments. "I'm flying out again Thursday," he said. "We'll do that dinner next week, maybe Friday? I'll book somewhere nice." "Okay," she said, the vowel opening like an ache. When he fell asleep, Lena lay awake, counting the seconds between each breathing shift as if timing contractions for a birth that never came. The rain slowed, then stopped, and the house settled into its nighttime posture, alert and tired. She rose and walked barefoot to the window Elijah had primed, touching the frame lightly. The paint was dry under her fingertip, clean and bright and full of promise. In the morning, Elijah returned to find her already in the den, a drop cloth spread across the floor, a small canvas resting on the coffee table like an invitation she hadn't yet accepted. He raised an eyebrow. "I don't know how to start," she admitted, a laugh catching in her throat. He set down his brush and pointed to the corner of the canvas. "Start small," he said. "Start where the light is easiest." She loaded a brush with a color that made her think of afternoon shadows on the porch steps and made a mark. Then another. Outside, the world went about its business. Inside, Lena let the air in her lungs belong to her for a full minute without apology. They didn't touch. This was not a story about accident. It was about attention. But attention has a way of turning the ordinary into a live wire, and by the time Thursday arrived, Lena was a woman walking through a house sparking at the edges. Mark kissed her cheek at the door, his lips cool and efficient. "Friday," he promised. "We'll talk then." He left, and the mad, clean light of morning poured in. Elijah set a ladder beneath the transom, and Lena, who had always been afraid of heights, stood at the base and looked up as if the sky were something she could learn. In that small, suspended moment, before the day decided what it would ask of her, she felt the paint in the air, the hush of preparation, the soft insistence of a life reintroducing itself. The day of the storm began with a scorch of sun, deceptively bright, the kind of morning that lies to you with its generosity. The forecast had whispered humidity, the trees had muttered restlessness, and Lena had woken with the specific thrum of a woman who knows change is useful only after it hurts. Elijah arrived early, his shirt already damp at the collar, and the air between them felt charged, full of static and unspent confessions. He worked in the hallway where the light fell and moved on, a pilgrim passing through. Lena painted in the den with the window cracked, every sound amplified, the soft drag of brush on wall, the ladder creak, the loose screw in the vent cover rattling like a cricket trying to be brave. A cloud crossed the sun, and the room cooled by a single breath. At noon, the first thunder rolled, far enough away to feel like gossip. Elijah went out to tarp the ladders, came back wet-haired and grinning like a boy who'd outrun a wave. "It'll pass north," he said, as if promising the sky a compromise. It did not. By 2, rain was shouldering the house from every direction, testing seams, arguing with the gutters. The power flickered and then failed, and the quiet that followed was profound, the kind that reveals the other machines of a life. The heart, the breath, the unpracticed truth standing in the doorway, hat in hand. Elijah set his brush down. "I'll check the breaker," he said, tone low, careful. "Careful," Lena said at the same moment, and they both smiled, the nervous kind. He returned with a towel around his shoulders, no power revived. "It's the neighborhood," he said. "We wait." They sat at the kitchen table with the storm staging its small opera against the windows. He looked at the bowl of cherries she'd set down without thinking. Rituals endure even when electricity doesn't, and took one, pitting it with his thumb the way he always did, stone placed neat beside the next. "Do you ever feel like your life turned into a room with no corners?" he asked, not looking up. "Like there's nowhere for dust to settle, so it all just floats and you keep breathing it." The question found Lena's ribs and took a seat. "Yes," she said. "I do." "Me too," he said. "After my father left, we moved apartments every 6 months. There was never time for a corner to claim us. My mother kept the windows open in winter. Said fresh air makes pain mind its manners." Lena laughed, the sound surprised and grateful. "Did it?" "Sometimes," he said. "Sometimes it just made the pain polite." Another thunderclap folded the room into itself for a heartbeat, and when it unfurled, Lena was crying. Not a film-ready single tear, not a tidy sadness. This was the kind that rearranges a person's face and leaves it more honest. Elijah looked at his hands and then at her, and the care in his gaze was almost unbearable. "You don't have to fix it," she said, embarrassed by the old reflex to apologize for having a human interior. "I know," he said, "but I can be here while it rains." When the power returned, it came back in increments: the hum of the refrigerator, the shy blink of the oven clock, the air conditioner's resigned exhale. The house pretended nothing had happened. The house was lying, but only the kind you forgive a friend for. Elijah stood, business returning to his posture. "I'll finish the hallway," he said. "We'll be on schedule." Schedule. The word landed like a coin in a jar, small, metallic, inevitable. At 4, Mark called. "Flight's delayed," he said. "Maybe tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Lena repeated, feeling the shape of the word in her mouth and finding both relief and something else, something like resentment warmed into resignation. "Be safe. Tell the painter to invoice me for the extra interior work," Mark said, as if his generosity could repair what he did not see. The storm passed, leaving the roads slick and the sky washed, thinner, as if something had been scraped away and only the essential remained. Elijah packed his tools with the particular quiet of a man measuring his steps. "Thank you for the cherries," he said, and she could not tell if he meant the fruit or the witness. "Thank you for the corners," she said, and they both let the room hold the meaning. He reached for the door and stopped, fingers on the knob, knuckles pale. "I don't cross certain lines," he said. He did not turn toward her. The confession faced the hallway, perhaps because it was safer to tell a wall the truth. "I know," she said. "Neither do I." He left. The house exhaled. Lena stood in the den, looked at the small canvas now holding the beginnings of a landscape, the suggestion of water, of a shore learning its own name, and realized she had painted a harbor without realizing it. She put the brush down as if laying a child to sleep. Twilight found her on the porch steps, the air dipped in gold, the fresh paint catching the last light and keeping it a second longer than the rest of the world. A car slowed in front of the house, the pause held judgment. It was the neighbor, Allison, who rolled her window down a fraction. "Looks beautiful," Allison called. "You've been busy." "We have," Lena said. The pronoun hung there, shared ownership of a house and a season. Allison nodded, eyes moving between Lena and the closed door. "Mark back tomorrow?" she asked. "That's the plan," Lena said. Plans, Lena thought later in bed, are someone else's way of convincing time to behave. She fell asleep and dreamed again of a ship making a turn, this time with a tugboat nudging its hull, a small force applied at exactly the right angle, a whisper disguised as an engine. Friday arrived with a sky so clear it felt like cruel optimism. The house gleamed, the porch wore its new coat like a promise kept by someone surprised to keep it. Lena walked room to room, touching door frames, window trim, the steady pulse of a home made new by attention. She was not naive. She knew paint cannot repair rot deep in a beam, cannot make a man look at his wife and see her as a beginning instead of a maintenance schedule, but she also knew how much the surface tells you if you listen. Elijah was scheduled to do last pass touch-ups and final cleanup. He arrived with a small bouquet of paint chips fanned like playing cards and a brown paper bag that turned out to be blueberry muffins, warm enough to tell a story about their recent past. You didn't have to, Lena said, the sentence so underfed it almost fell apart on the plate. I wanted to, he said. Blueberries are a paint color you can eat. They laughed, relief in it. He moved through the rooms like a final line edit, catching drips, feathering edges, stepping back to let the light say what it needed to. Lena followed, not hovering so much as witnessing. She had become a woman who could stand beside a man without needing to claim or erase him. She barely recognized herself and liked the stranger she was meeting. At noon, Mark texted. Landing 3:10, dinner 7. Wear that blue dress? No question mark. The blue dress was still in the dry cleaner plastic, a relic of a certain version of their life. Lena smoothed the plastic and saw her reflection stutter in the gloss. She set the dress on the bed and returned to the hallway where Elijah was kneeling, cleaning a paint tray with an attentiveness most people reserve for sacred objects. There's a small water stain here, he said, pointing to the ceiling corner. Old, but the roof might need an inspection before winter. I'll schedule it, Lena said. She meant it. He stood and they found themselves too close, the kind of close you don't step into by accident. Neither of them moved. The space between them was full of everything they had not done and everything they had. You were right, she said, voice steady. Some things take longer when you're alone. He looked at her like a man allowed one look. And some things heal faster when someone notices, he said. They didn't touch. It mattered that they didn't. Lena felt something in her unclench not because she was resisting him, but because she was finally refusing to disappear. He packed the last of his tools, left the invoice on the kitchen island, a neat, itemized love letter to labor, and paused at the door. There's an opening in the Saturday class, he said, as if slipping a note into a locker. I stopped by the studio this morning on my way. Instructor said a woman named Lena called in sick and won't be back this term. Starts tomorrow. Tomorrow, Lena repeated, and the word tasted like a color she would learn to mix. I'll be there, he nodded, then let himself out into a day too bright to argue with. Mark arrived at 3:24, suitcase wheel clicking against the front step where the crack had been patched. He kissed the air near Lena's cheek and declared the house much improved, which was his way of acknowledging a job well done without having to ask who had done it. He showered, shaved, changed into a suit that still had the dry cleaner crease in the trousers, and inspected Lena in the blue dress as if she were a report to be finalized. You look good, he said. It was not untrue, it simply wasn't the truth that mattered. At dinner, the restaurant performed abundance. Candles, thick napkins, waiters moving like choreography. Mark spoke about the board, the pivot, the runway. Lena listened, then tried to speak about the house, not the costs, but the care, the small intelligence of doing a thing right. Mark nodded, asked about the invoice, then scrolled his phone under the table when he thought she wasn't looking. When the entrees arrived, she set down her fork. Are we unhappy? She asked, the question landing slightly louder than she intended, like a glass placed carelessly on wood. Mark blinked, then recovered with a smile so polished she could see herself inside it and not recognize the woman reflected. We're busy, he said. It's a season. Lena felt a rush of heat that was not anger so much as clarity. Busy is a word people use when they don't want to tell the truth, she said. I think we forgot how to look at each other. Mark's jaw worked. And what truth are you asking me to say tonight? He asked, a thread of warning braided into the softness. That I'm lonely, she said. That I have been for a long time. He set his knife down as if it were fragile. Is there someone else? He asked. The question sprawled between them, clumsy and old. No, she said, and the word surprised her with how much room it made. There is attention, there is paint, there is me learning the true names of things I live with every day and never see. Mark leaned back. You want counseling, he said, tone halfway between decision and dare. I want to find out if we can learn to see each other again, she said. And if we can't, I want us to say it out loud like adults who loved each other and don't want to ruin the good that's left by pretending it isn't broken. Silence then, not empty, full. The waiter appeared with a dessert menu and retreated when he read the room. After, on the drive home, Mark gripped the wheel and didn't turn on the radio. I don't know how to talk about feelings, he admitted finally, the sentence strange in his mouth, like a phrase in a language he'd studied in night school and never spoken aloud. I know how to fix problems. I don't know how to be one. You're not a problem, Lena said and meant it. You're a person I might have lost and would like to try to find. They slept in the same bed that night, backs not touching, the air between them tender with truce. In the morning, Lena woke before the alarm and lay watching the light crawl up the wall, a slow animal exploring. She put on jeans and a cotton shirt with a paint blot she'd stopped trying to scrub out, made coffee, and wrote a note on the counter. Saturday class back by noon. Mark came down as she was lacing her shoes. He looked at the note, then at her. The blue dress is good, he said softly, but this looks like you. I know, she said. I'm going to learn the names of all my colors. At the studio, the room smelled like turpentine and rain from a forgotten umbrella. The instructor was a woman with gray hair and laugh lines who handed Lena a palette and said, "You made it like it was more than a fact." Lena stood before a blank canvas and did not apologize for its emptiness. She made a mark where the light was easiest. She made another. By the time she returned home, Elijah's ladder was gone, his invoice paid, his name stored in her phone under Painter. Not because she intended to call, but because some names you keep where you can see them to remind you what attention can do. The porch held its color, the patched step felt firm underfoot, and Lena set an apple on the kitchen counter and considered its red like a language she might become fluent in. Mark came in from the yard holding the mail. He set it down and leaned against the island, looking strangely young in his uncertainty. I made an appointment, he said. Counselor, Tuesday at 4, I don't know how this works. Me neither, she said, but I can learn. That afternoon, they walked the perimeter of the house together, a tour of edges. He asked about elastomeric caulk and roof inspections and what feathering the edge meant. She answered, not as a test, but as a telling. When they reached the patched step, he tapped it with his shoe. Feels solid, he said. It is, she replied. For now. They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, and the future did not arrive as a blaze of certainty. It came as a small, honest quiet, a room with corners where dust could settle and be swept up together when the time came. Lena slipped her hand into Mark's, not as forgiveness, not as a promise she couldn't keep, but as an agreement to keep looking. The house listened, as houses do. And outside, somewhere just past hearing, a boat turned where the channel narrowed, guided by something small, persistent, and exactly enough.